Dr. Wilson.
So I know that you're probably slided out and everyone wants to have slides when they talk, but it's a crutch for me. I cannot talk without slides. So I'm gonna go over some slides with you. Madeline, can you confirm that you can see slides? Okay, cool. So today we're supposed to be talking about the policy proposal, and I pulled together some resources that I thought would be useful for you. And as always, I share these slides with Jen because when I build the slides, I put links and stuff in there so that you can access the content. And let's see. Okay. Cool. Is this okay with you the way it's set up? All right, cool. So a couple of things I want to talk with you about. First, I'm going to have a air quotes summary presentation, and it's really just I found some materials that I thought would be useful for crafting a good award-winning policy proposal. And then we'll talk a little bit about the specifics, not much, just reinforce exactly what's being asked of you. But then I just want to have an opportunity for you to ask any questions and me to, well, really, Jen, to answer any questions that you have because they're the expert on this instead of me. But briefly, so what I did was I found a couple years ago, I just started by assuming I had to write a policy proposal and tried to find materials that I would consult in drafting one that would win a Truman Scholarship. So first of all, not to be stupid, but let's start from the very, very, very basic so we're all on the same page. What do you have to do here? Well, you're going to have to write a research piece focusing on a specific policy issue that provides clear recommendations. There's a couple of concepts that we need to make sure that you're aware of here. The first is there needs to be research here. This is important because I often get student submissions that are research, but their definition of research is finding something online and inserting it in the form of an in-text citation with something in the bibliography. That is not research. That's just collating information to back up whatever points you feel like making. The second thing is it has to be a specific policy issue. Emphasis on specific. You know, there's a lot of things that are wrong with the world. There's a lot that we wish that we could change, but there's going to be an emphasis here on whether you've identified a singular problem for which you may have one or a few solutions for. And then second is clear recommendations. This is unlike the research part, which requires you to consult outside resources as you come up with your ideas. This is basically requires you to spend time thinking about what would you propose? What would you come up with given a particular problem? And the reason I emphasize this is because you could do really good research. You could have a specific policy issue, and then you could just end up falling on your face by saying, yeah, well, lawmakers should think about this, or we should throw money at it. And that's not going to work because it's not a clear recommendation. And it's not a specific recommendation. By the way, stop me whenever. I'm happy to pause to answer any questions you may have. All right, so the basics here. You got to have a policy issue, there needs to be research involved, and you got to have recommendations for that problem. One way to really go about this, and the structure that I would encourage you to use to underlie these three elements, is spending time thinking about the cost and benefits of whatever solution is that you may have to the problem. So Stanford Law School has a nice document on tips for writing policy papers. And here they're just going over what a policy paper is, what the components of a good, strong policy piece would be. And as I said, you can click on this, it'll take you to the resource. But in this document, they say you should really break out all the journalistic elements. Who are you addressing? What are you addressing? Why, how, when? And this is important because it helps you to figure out the specifics that your audience is going to be looking for. So who is your target audience? And I would divide this up into who are the people to whom you are addressing this policy piece, but also what is the target audience whose lives you hope to improve as a result of this proposal? And then what is the specific issue? Why? You need to give reasons, but also this is something I'm going to emphasize today a lot, is you should be contrasting this against existing approaches. Because when I was young, every time I had an idea, I guess I still do it, but every time I have an idea, I assume that it's never been done before, it's never been thought of before, it's going to be life-changing, right? The only reason I haven't become a millionaire is just because I haven't put out that $1 million idea yet. But the thing is that lots of approaches have been tried. And so you should consider, as you start with your issue, why are we still here in the 21st century? Why is this still an issue? And then the how and the when. So evidence matters a lot. If you say a point, you need to emphasize, you need to back it up with some piece of tangible evidence that demonstrates that what you're saying is indeed the case. And that includes the recommendation. If you have a recommendation to make, is there any evidence on which that recommendation might seem to be the right answer? Are there any examples of that recommendation being used elsewhere that have worked? And then also you can do that by thinking about the payoffs. So the SLS document says you should orient your data around your solutions. And they have two frameworks for doing this. I didn't come up with these acronyms, but they say first, as you sit down with a piece of paper, before you put anything on, writing down anything, consider what impacts your potential solutions might have for different areas. Are they political solutions? Are they economic? Are they social? Are they technological? Are they multiple of those categories? And then the second framework is to think about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. I think you probably are aware of this, thinking about the strengths and weaknesses, but I had not thought about what are opportunities created by these solutions. And this is actually really, if you're interested in academics, this is useful for thinking about grant applications, because it's one thing to say, if you give me money, I will do this one thing. It's another thing to say, if you provide money to do this one thing, it also creates the opportunity for these other downstream effects that you hadn't even thought of. So it suggests that money can have a compounding effect. So this is just an example of the PEST framework here, where this person, it looks like the issue they're thinking about is how to deal with pesticides. And on the left-hand side are the options. So you could do nothing about them, you could tax the use of them, you could ban more of them, you could discourage the use of them by providing tax rates to specific crops that are ecologically friendly, or you could limit the number of pesticides used on certain crops. And they've broken this up into, well, is it going to have a net benefit or net harm politically, administratively? What does it do for equity? What are its environmental impacts, and what are the potential economic impacts? By breaking this up, you're realizing, perhaps given the opportunity to realize that every solution has trade-offs, and that your choice of a solution may depend on which one has the biggest net gains, but while also allowing you to consider what potential issues are. Then this framework here, they divided it up into the audiences. So is this a net plus for the public, or farmers, the companies that produce the chemicals, the labor, the environment, farmers that care about, organic farming? And notice they've divided up the traditional farmers, people who would typically use pesticides because they don't care, versus those that normally don't use pesticides because they're more aware of it or more concerned about it. So it's just really helpful for dividing this stuff up. And I think you can already imagine that if you're a reviewer looking at these things, everyone's going to have a problem, everyone's going to have a solution. What you're really going to want to see is that someone has used critical thinking to develop a realistic assessment of how far a solution would go and who might push back on it and why they might not like it. So to breaking things up this way is not just homework. It's helpful for demonstrating that you've really gotten a sense of the nuance of the issue. All right, so the next document that I found was this book manuscript that, this was 2014, but it's now a published book, so you can find it online, but it's also available here. But the person argues that, public policies are investments. And this is, I may have offended one or more of you in our initial conversations, because I always like to say, all right, for the people outside of your issue, why should we care? Why should I put my money into the solution that you're thinking of? Because ultimately, any sort of policy proposal, if it is a public issue, you are looking for investors. And you're looking for investors not just within the community who would be affected by your problem. You want people who aren't even remotely related to the problem to want the government, to want investors to put money in order to solve this problem. So your solution, the way that you frame this should suggest that the benefits, despite potential costs and despite potential audiences who might be harmed by it, that there are net gains over time. And as I said, compounding opportunities that can be created by using the solution that you have in mind to address the problem. But there's a bunch of issues to consider. I'm sure you're aware of most of them, but first of all, any sort of collective action, government is a coordination problem. Getting anyone to do anything is a coordination problem. So one of the things to consider is, what is the best tack? What is the best framing device? What is the best sort of solution that you can come up with that would help mitigate the fact that all of us are rational but still animalistic creatures who are self-concerned and want as much as we can for ourselves? How do you convince people to step outside of their own self-interest and contribute to something that should help everyone but doesn't benefit everyone equally? And this is important because this is you're asking people to put money in, to take from a collective pool and opportunity cost. I could spend this money on something else. I could spend my time doing something else. So you're trying to convince people at heart to take common resources when they might not have a personal interest in them and contribute it toward this particular issue when there are lots of other issues. So what's the public value? What is the value to everyone involved? And of course, public policy makes a better world in theory, and particularly if you go into it thinking about your specific issue. In my mind, I've created a world in which this problem is front and foremost, and if you do the thing that I've come up with, the world will be better off. But would everyone see it that way? Something to consider. So, how do you express what needs to be done here? You've identified an issue and you've come up with a potential solution, and yes, it's going to be good, but in what way is it going to make the world better? There are different ways that you can express goals and the value of your particular solutions. So examples might be saying, well, this really would help human flourishing. It creates opportunities for individuals to become more upwardly mobile or to pursue their individual goals and advance. Or perhaps it strengthens institutions. Two different things. In part because sometimes strengthening institutions does so at the cost of humans being able to advance their own interests. Alternatively, promoting efficiency. Maybe you don't strengthen an institution, but you enhance its capacity to get something done in a quick manner. Or promoting sustainability, making it so that a particular practice is less costly over time and it can continue to operate. Or advancing human rights, promoting social equity. Each of these are different dimensions in which the world might be better off because of a particular policy proposal, but rarely does a policy proposal accomplish all of these things. So by considering the fact that it's not going to make the whole world better in every way, you're able to be more specific and demonstrate a more realistic understanding of what it is you're hoping to accomplish. Okay, the next thing is, all right, so you've got this idea, you've thought through the strengths and weaknesses, the different audiences, who might be helped and hurt. You've thought about the specific way in which the world might be made better off by your particular solution. What is your solution? What's the tool that you're supposed to be using to accomplish the thing that you want to accomplish? I would, based on limited information from what I've seen, because I'm pretty new to the committee, but I feel like this is an area that tends to be pretty weak, which is thinking through what exactly is the instrument that's supposed to be used to accomplish the thing that you want to accomplish. Because policy can do lots of different things. It can create spaces for market exchanges. It can, impose taxes, taking money from someone to pay for something else. Alternatively, it can provide subsidies. So taking money through, or maybe not through taxes, but taking money from some resource and incentivizing people to do something by paying them to do it, or regulating their behavior, regulating some exchanges, providing direct supply of services that previously didn't exist. In contrast to the direct service supply, it could contract. So reach out to someone else to provide a service and create a network of that service provision that you are not the one in charge of. Or maybe it's not about creating markets or affecting the flow of money from individuals or regulating their behavior or contracting particular service. Maybe it's just about getting news and information out, helping people be more aware and creating an infrastructure for information getting. Each of these are different instruments. The Mintrum book, their suggested framework for developing a policy proposal is first focus on existing policies and programs. So think about what is out there, because even though Alex may have understood a problem and this revolutionary idea, it's not in a vacuum. potentially, unless we completely overlooked what's going on, somebody's tried to address it somewhere. So there are existing policies that have tried to deal with this issue. Then before you get into what your solution should be, gather the evidence for it. How have previous policies worked, or why didn't they work? Why is this still a problem, or in what way is it a problem? What are the reasons that you think your solution would be valuable for addressing this issue? And then, of course, identifying some sort of measurement for this, some way of anticipating what the effect of your solution would be. And of course, just like the SLS piece, assessing the cost and benefits. So Mintram, just like the Stanford Law School says, yes, don't go into this assuming that your solution is just all benefits and no cost. So how do you assess the cost and benefits? Well, by defining the scope. This is important because there can be short-term cost and long-term cost. There can be short-term benefits, long-term benefits. So thinking about your solution over different periods of time, identifying all the effects by thinking about, okay, in what way might it be negative versus positive, considering its effect on geographic locations. So maybe it's good for a central location, but it occurs or it's funded at the expense of people on the periphery. And then, of course, given those different cost and benefits, thinking about the net value. And then they suggest offering robust advice. And while I don't want to tell you to write a whole bunch of stuff and to grasp at straws and create a quilt, it's also useful to not be singular in what should happen. So that is to say, if you have a solution, I would at least encourage you to have 1.5 solutions. So if not your idea, what else should be done? If we can't do exactly what Madeline suggests we should do, then what generally should we be aiming for in order to mitigate this problem? Okay, and then the final piece, funnily enough, was a book that randomly showed up at my desk. Because professors get sent books all the time, and there are often things that are not even remotely related to what we do. But this book showed up, and I was like, this is kismet, because I had just started on the Truman Committee. So this book was on analyzing policy and dealing with coming up with solutions, and it's a really good book actually. So they suggest this 8-fold path, which is quite nirvanic. I know that's not a word, but that's what we're going to call it, nirvanic. So first, obviously, define the problem, assemble some evidence, construct the alternatives. By the way, I know I'm repeating myself at this point, but that's a good thing, because that means all 3 of these sources are saying the same thing. Select your criteria, project the outcomes, confront the trade-offs, decide, tell your story. I mean, the last 2 parts are kind of silly, but basically, come up with your issue, figure out the evidence clearly. Using some evidence beyond just saying, this is what I see as the issue is going to matter. Constructing the alternatives, again, like the other 2 sources, make sure that you couch your understanding of the problem and the solution in terms of all the trade-offs that people could face. The opportunity cost cannot be stressed enough, because so my spouse is an economist, and whenever I want to do anything, they always say, well, what's the opportunity cost? Which is their way of saying, should we really waste our time doing that? Selecting the criteria. This is also important because there's cost and benefits. There's lots of different people who might be hurt and who would benefit from it. So what are the criteria that we should use to decide whether this thing is the problem that we should deal with, and that this solution is the solution that we should go with? I think a one-liner in your proposal that establishes that if we all agree that this is the criteria for determining how the problem should be dealt with, then it should be clear that this would be the most likely solution. And one of the reasons I wanted to stress that is because in academic arguments, it's easy to get pedantic, and the only solution is for everyone to agree on the starting assumptions. So if we can all agree on what the color blue is, then we can agree that the sky is blue. If we can't agree on the criteria, then we're never going to get to an agreement on what should be the case. Of course, and then they're talking about thinking about long-term. What are the outcomes in the short term versus the long term? Acknowledge the trade-offs. I'm pretty sure that this is something that Truman wants to see. And this is an area where I feel like the policy proposals I've seen have been weak, in the sense that people invest so much on the good about their idea, and then they say at the end, yeah, and some people might not like it. And that's it. Jen, am I wrong here?
I don't think you're wrong. There's not a lot of room to do that, but they do ask. I mean, Truman asks, "What are the obstacles to your proposal?" Which is kind of what this is. And so they don't ask you to solve them. They just want, yeah, like a recognition that this is not going to be super easy necessarily. That it's not a no-brainer that everyone says, "Yes, of course. Why haven't I done this before?" So it's just more a question of how much you can pack into the limited word count that we have.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that wins awards here is succinctness
Yes.
and compactness, I'm sure. But I've seen several policy proposals where the trade-offs or the obstacles, they just put, oh, and some people might not like this.
Right. It needs to be more specific than that.
Yeah.
Like, why might they not like it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my favorite thing in this book was this decide thing, because they say, whatever you come up with, apply the $20 bill test. I now use this when I talk to my grad students. When they come up with these amazing ideas, you're walking down the street with a friend, and you look down on the sidewalk and you see a $20 bill, and you go to pick it up, and your friend says, "Don't bother. If it was really a $20 bill, somebody would have picked it up by now." If your policy alternative is a good thing, why hasn't someone come up with it? If it's so great and so easy and so obvious in the face of alternatives, then why do we have to come up with it now? Hasn't it already come to being? Okay, and then of course at the end of the day, we're just trying to, all of this in a short space is to convince people that this is something that matters and that they should see this as a rational, that they should see action on this as a rational conclusion given the issue that we're facing. Are any questions about the materials that I just discussed? Okay, so the specifics. So you've got this really small space to cram a lot of stuff. And I feel like this is academic writing 101 in the sense that when you're an undergrad, you often are given minimums. You have to write 2,000 words, 3,000 words. And when I write papers, I have to get maximums because I will write 20,000, 30,000 words and then have to cut it down to 10,000. So part of doing a good job on this is writing way more than is necessary for the space and then cutting it down and making it succinct and figuring out how to fit it into that rather than just filling the boxes. So I would encourage you to approach it that way. And we have some examples of good Truman policy proposals that would probably help you. It's crazy to me how little writing there is there, considering the fact that you're being asked to do so much and to think so hard about it. But like any grant application, the real work isn't in the words. It's in all the thought that goes into the words. So anytime that I've ever written a grant, it's been days and days and days of writing stuff on paper, writing stuff on a whiteboard, thinking through the issues, and then trying to cram it all down into a couple of sentences. The template, I don't think this has changed, but you're being asked to do three things. First, the problem statement, your proposed solution, and then the major obstacles, challenges. I would encourage you, and of course, Jen may give you different advice, but I would encourage you to try not to let one to bleed into the other. And the reason is because I think some people can get so focused on the problem statement that they end up writing more about that in the proposed solution that the proposed solution ends up lacking. Or they focus so much on why the solution is so great, they don't really think about the obstacles. And that's an easy way to eat up space by giving too much to one of these three areas. And then in a shout out to a colleague who's not on the committee anymore, or this year, they always emphasize the connecting thread. Because what they're looking for in the Truman application is someone who tells a consistent story, someone whose personal background and leadership experience have led them to be uniquely positioned to both care about and address the sort of issue that they're talking about in this policy proposal. So one thing that I would encourage you to do is to not develop this policy proposal in isolation from the rest of your application. I would encourage you to think of the policy proposal as an extension of the person you are representing yourself as in this application. if you believe in X, Y, and Z, if you became a leader in X, Y, and Z, then this has led you to care about addressing this particular policy issue. I also want to give you a little piece of encouragement because I've been in academia for a long time now, and I've worked on a lot of applications, and I've won maybe 1% of applications that I've applied to, but working on these sorts of things is really good. And the reason is not because you might win it. That is to say, whenever I have a graduate student who starts writing an application, yeah, they hope they're going to win the $30,000, but in all likelihood, they're probably not. So what's the motivation for working on this if it's really unlikely that they're going to win the lottery anyway? The reason is because it's essentially a form of guided meditation. You're being given an opportunity to sit down and think about who you are, what got you to where you are right now, what you actually care about, and if given resources from now to 5 years from now to 10 years from now, if someone came to you at some point and gave you resources, what would you dedicate your time to improving? And if you really take that seriously and put that down on paper and clean that up, then even if you don't win the Truman, you do have a much better understanding of who you are and a much more solid understanding of what you might apply for next time. So anytime I work on an application, I tell myself, I'm not writing for this application so much as this and any future application. So I just hope that that gives you some encouragement for taking the time to work through this policy proposal. If it were me, I would say, I mean, before Professor Wilson did this, I would say, why should I spend all this time on the policy proposal? I'm not going to win anyway, or I might not win anyway, you know, because I'd be pessimistic at the beginning. But I would say, no, this is an opportunity to hone the ideas that you can use for multiple applications. And of course, since you're both going to win the Truman, it doesn't matter. But I want you to approach it that way. Okay, I think that's all that I have. The last thing I wanted to emphasize, and this is the more nitpicky, pessimistic part of me coming out, which is of the little bit that I've seen, what are some issues? And of course, should put a big asterisk on it because this does not represent the views of the committee. This is just me. I've seen people come up with stats, but these are just numbers that they pulled from different reports. They found some numbers, some percentages, they shoved them in different places, put in an insect citation, and they think they're good to go. And it just doesn't work because either the stat doesn't accomplish what they think it's going to accomplish, or it's in the wrong place, or it is just fluff. It's quite easy to use evidence to avoid saying the succinct things that you should say. The other thing is too long a windup. People in that first paragraph end up trying so hard to describe a problem that they end up not having room for anything else. Or they attempt to be so eloquent in their description of the problem that they don't get much across. Another thing that I see is what really bothers me is in considering previous efforts to mitigate a problem. I've seen policies that say, well, such and such has been tried, and that's good, but ... and they move on. I feel like that's rather weak because if it's good, then we don't really need your help. If it's not good, you need to say precisely why it isn't good. I think that taking the middle ground and saying, well, they made a good effort, but let's try this instead, seems very non-committal. And then, of course, use of jargon. You should assume that the people who are reading your writing aren't specialists on, you know, transportation policy or medicine or LGBT politics. So any sort of jargon that you use, what I would do is I would write the way it feels comfortable to me, and then go back through and highlight the words that a fourth grader might not understand, and ask myself if there's an easier way that I could say it. My parents ought to be able to read this and have a sense of what you want to accomplish. Second to last, vague references to things. There's always, you know, these things should be this. People should do this. Just try not to reference obscure things, even if there's ideas that you've held in your head if you've been writing. Your readers might not hold those ideas in their head as they're reading through your proposal. And then, of course, softness on opposition. This is my pet peeve because whatever you come up with, a person who's reviewing hundreds of applications they would, I mean, I would imagine if I was reading hundreds of applications and I see Alex's proposal, my first thought is, what are the reasons that I shouldn't like this? What are the reasons that I should not adopt this proposal or not adopt this solution? Or why should I not see this as a problem? So going into this, I would encourage you not to think of your proposal as being the ultimate solution. Think of it as, look, I know that there's reasons that you might not like it, but here's why this is the thing you should focus your attention on, at the exclusion of other issues and other potential solutions. So don't go soft on opposition here. Seriously consider, who would be my biggest critic? And let's not make that personal. Who would be the biggest critic of this solution? Who would be the biggest critic of this as a problem that we should be dealing with right now? And then write that to them. Don't write it to your supporters. Because if you draft this thing to the people that you think love your ideas, then it's going to be weak in the face of those who are skeptical about whether this is the policy proposal that we should adopt. And that's it. That's all I've got. So this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions, for us to talk about whatever. Oh. It's also an opportunity for you to pitch some of your thoughts. If you want to say, well, I was going to argue this, and we could discuss it.
Okay, so one thing with mine, I don't know exactly if I'm going to stick with the topic area I chose, which was about like a lack of like quality enforcement, a lack of implementation as far as like child care welfare policy goes, but I don't know if I'm going to stick with that exact topic area. But something that I would hopefully like to keep is that emphasis on like a lack of implementation that specifically incorporates research and what we know about what's beneficial as far as implementation goes. So I don't know, like I feel like that's kind of the problem, but it also has to do with the solution a little too. So how would I avoid making that too like muddy, I guess?
Well, can I ask, can you rephrase it without using the word implementation? What would you say that the problem is that you want to address?
Well, okay, so this specific problem was talking about how with welfare policy, there's often like disparities in how the program, like the quality of the program, where programs are, and like kind of talking about how there's a lack of programs across the nation, a lot of like childcare deserts. So I know a lot of that had to do with like how there wasn't like if there was enforcement with I guess like if there's enforcement of the policies that are supposed to be helping, but they're actually like there's a lot of disparities and inequalities in how they're being implemented. So I'm sorry, I know I used implementation again, but
No, it's fine.
to
It's
give a
fine.
better idea.
So I would say, by the way, if I ever come across as critical, I'm just trying to parse it, not parse you. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is hold conversations like this with either a really smart friend or one of the Truman Committee members, and let them tear it apart. Because one of the things I would say after what you just said is this about inequities or is this about enforcement issues? Because it sounded like you were talking about two different problems. Because one could say, well, there's welfare policies, but they're not equitably distributed, and that has major problems for those areas that are not covered. The other one is, well, there are programs, they're just not enforced in certain areas. So I would encourage you to first pick between those, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Okay, that makes sense. But do you think like as far as if I was to kind of take the route of looking at how there's poor enforcement of a lot of welfare programs, how that has issues that lead to like inequality? Because like in some areas, we know that welfare programs are like enforced a lot better, like as far as what programs are available in some states. So it's like, I guess, how do I divide that up? Like if the problem I'm pointing out is enforcement, but the solution would also just kind of relate back to the problem a lot more directly. Like it's not introducing anything new, I guess. It's more saying that we'd have to look at that enforcement and like specific ways of looking at that. Then how do I make that not like too, I guess, chaotic?
No, yeah, you're fine. And this is good. This is good. So I think you're getting ahead of yourself. So what I would say is first, tell me what the problem is. And then once you've got that completely clear, I would say, okay, why is it a problem? And then once you've elaborated precisely why that's a problem, I would say, okay, what would you do to fix that? So right now, I think those three questions are occupying the same space in your mind. And I would say only until you can figure it out, only until you can tell me exactly what the problem is and why it's a problem, can we talk about what instruments should we use to deal with it.
Okay.
Because perhaps a solution to enforcement is greater regulatory control or centralization of activities or investment in strengthening specific aspects of the program. But those three different instruments depend on exactly what you think the problem is. So I say, don't worry about what we should do with it.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Um, yeah, I'm kind of still like floating around a bunch of different ideas, so I definitely don't have something like ironed out. I know I've talked with Jen about this, but I guess I wanted your reaction. Like we had talked about like kind of the problem that I've currently have in my draft is talking about like trust in government and how there's a mistrust, like how there's been um like trust has eroded over like recent years or like over like a span of time. And so I was wanted to specifically look at the problem of like misinformation and disinformation on like online platforms, but then I know that opens up like a whole can of worms of like First Amendment issues and stuff like that. So I just wanted like your reaction on like, is that like too broad of a problem? To like, should I narrow that down? Like what's your kind of like reaction to that?
Okay. I have like three answers, three responses. So the first is I want to apologize for the way I acted during your interview, because if you remember, you said part of your application was something about humanizing people, and I said, well, does that actually work? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. No, it was not because I doubt the ability of media to portray people in a positive way and shape people's opinions. It's because in political science, I was shaken by the fact that a student had wrote this dissertation that everyone loved, that told this story about people who held anti-LGBT views being exposed to LGBT individuals and then suddenly deciding that they're fine with them. And it turned out they made up all the data. They completely lied about it. So my approach to you was, do we think that works? Do we think exposing people to ideas changes their ideas? So if you're not going that route, then that's fine. I just wanted to get that off the plate.
Okay.
The second thing is misinformation is a major problem. What do we do with it? I don't know. There's quite a bit of research going on, especially in my area, on what the effects of misinformation and disinformation are, and potentially policy solutions to it, whatnot. It is a big topic. I think you could narrow something down within there. So
Okay.
I might say, and if you give me 10 seconds, y'all can't see the folder that I have open, can you? No? Okay, good. So I'm going to share. So I have this thing I could share with you. Last spring, I taught a class on dictatorship. And I created a prompt one day about disinformation. And it's all these news stories about the fact that essentially we're living in a dystopian society where robots can tell us what to believe, right? And so it's saying, people are using AI for political lobbying. People are using AI-generated content and ads. People are AI images are not regulated. What you do with content that is generated by artificial intelligence is not something that we have a lot of control over. There's deepfake videos, and there are companies that you can hire to influence elections using artificial intelligence. And in fact, this one here is about a BBC journalist that was hired by a team that was hired to influence an election. So they were actually reporting news on behalf of this company. So it was essentially tying together all these issues about what misinformation is, not to scare the students, but to say, where do we even start to deal with the fact that we all have different incentives to shape political outcomes, and the technology that we have to do that is getting almost outside of our control. I think one thing you could do is you could just pick one. So we can't take care of the whole problem, but should we go after companies that that throw elections for hire? Should we go after election security? Should we go after deep fake? Should we try to regulate AI generated material? Should we create rules about the ability to use AI content in political lobbying and ads? You name it. But I think don't come at this as misinformation is the problem. I would say pick one aspect of misinformation and let's just dive into that. Because there's plenty of material that you can use to deal with that. By the way, if you want to know something crazy, so there's this company called Sinclair that bought up a bunch of local news stations. And so basically local news all over the country reads the same scripts that this company tells them to read. But yeah, you got your pick of the litter when it comes to a specific issue within the realm of misinformation.
Okay. Would you be able to share that document with me just so I can kind of look through some of the articles? Is that okay?
Yeah. For $10, I'll send you 2 copies.
Thank you.
I tell you what, if you send me an email and or just email me and I'll send it to you in a link.
Okay, perfect.
And by the way, I wasn't trying to show off. My point was that the issue comprises a whole laundry list of specific issues, and you could literally just pick one and go after that.
No, and that's super helpful just like to target, because I think we can all acknowledge like misinformation, disinformation is a very widespread, vague topic. So like really narrowing in on something is super helpful.
Oh, and my third point there, the reason I led off with an apology is because I come from a family that doesn't trust the other side, which is scary because I am the other side. And I don't know, I don't even begin to fathom how are we going to deal with that. So the media is going to play a pivotal role, and the quality of media is going to be critically important. But how can you convince someone who thinks the other side is out to get them, and who doesn't like them anyway, and who, even if you liked each other and sat down to dinner together, still wouldn't vote for the same policies? How do you use information to get them to change their minds? That's a big ask.
Yeah, it's a very big ask.
I say that not to dishearten you, but to say, you've got to really come up with a tangible issue that you think you can address here.
Absolutely.
I think that can be one of the hardest parts with Truman, because it seems like, question 9 is asking you for what is the problem you're trying to solve, which is the huge thing. And then the policy proposal really is, I say it's a slice of 9, but I think Dr. Wilson is really pointing out, like, it is as narrow a slice as you can make it, because that's what you can actually wrap your hands around and give some. So don't feel like you have to solve this gigantic problem, because you can't. That's why it's still a big problem. Like it needs really specific things. So thank you for all that really excellent advice on sort of how to keep asking the question to narrow it and be like, okay, here's one thing that I can do. And that's all Truman's asking for. It doesn't matter what level either, right? Like it can be at a local level, it can be at a state level, it can be at a national level. International is kind of hard, but I guess possible. But so it is more just how are you explaining the problem and giving an actual solution.
One thing I would say, just to build off of what Jen said, is whenever I have a student who's starting a writing assignment, they typically, understandably, come to me with this big grand idea. So, I want to write about elections. Okay, what about elections? I want to write about election quality. Okay, what about election quality? I want to write about the quality of elections when it comes to security of polling places. If you keep saying, but what about, what you are able to do is to distill at least a specific idea that they have in mind. So whenever I start a project, I used to, I don't really do it anymore, but I use the inverted triangle. So yeah, you have your big thing at the top that you might have in mind, but that isn't ultimately the thing that you're going to be writing about. So I would say start off with just what is your topic? And then, but what about? And then, but what about? Until you get down to one specific statement. And typically, my conversations with my students involve starting at the top and getting them to the point where they have a thesis statement that is as precise as can possibly be, because that's the thing that you can test. And this is applicable because, yeah, you might want to tackle misinformation, or you might want to tackle distrust or polarization, but that's just the top of the triangle. That's not the policy proposal. The policy proposal is the specific thing that exists that we might have an instrument that we could apply to address it. And the thing is, it won't fix misinformation, it won't fix polarization, but what it does is create it is a kink in the armor, and it creates downstream opportunities for addressing other slices that allows you to say that you're making gains on the overall triangle. And I just want to say, for Madeline, that might be one way to start, is if the top of your triangle is welfare inequity. Okay, what about welfare inequity? Well, childcare. Okay, but what about childcare? Well, childcare deserts exist, meaning there are pockets of the country where people don't have access to care for their children that would allow them to do X, Y, and Z. Now you're starting to get to a particular slice about providing people the opportunity to have their children cared for so that they can pursue employment opportunities. And that becomes a lot more tangible. Any other questions, comments?
So just to make sure, like, are you fine with us sending any like proposals or drafts that we work on for feedback?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All I ask is that don't get upset if I'm critical of it, because my job is to tear things apart. The worst thing about academia is that it is a job that is built on criticism. My whole life is saying, hey, I did this cool thing. Will you tell me all the things you hate about it? So if you give it to me, I'm not going to write back and say it's great. I'm going to look for all the reasons that a person might not think it's the most award-winning proposal, with the intention of helping you make it succinct, cut out the unnecessary parts, things like
Great.
that.
Thank you.
We share that in this world of fellowships too, Dr. Wilson. So it's like, this is good. How can we make it better? Here's all the things. So to that end, I would say, so thank you for being willing to look at drafts, because I think that that's really helpful. I think I'm tweaking some of the deadlines, or just, I mean, Truman deadlines are very much in flux in terms of where everybody is. But my target would be, and I know everyone's got drafts in and is getting feedback right now without the policy proposal. My goal would be a full draft of everything, like the next full draft, including policy, by January 2nd. And then we can try and turn that around and get you some more comments. So hopefully have another couple of rounds of drafts before mid-January, because the deadline's going to come really fast now. It's been a longer-ish fall, and then the national deadline is, I believe, February 6th. But we're looking at a submission date for us for January 30th, just because we want everything in the system so we can do a final check. We will have another meeting with the full committee, which we haven't scheduled yet, but another chance for everybody to have read all of the materials and give one more round of insight. So
Speaking of a round of insights, I do have one little piece of advice. So as you first get started on your policy proposal, I would encourage you, there's three of them, right? Alex, Madeline, and
Reese.
Reese. I would encourage you to work together. So when
Yeah,
I was an undergrad, what I used to do when I started writing a research paper is I would call my best friend on the phone and go for a walk in the neighborhood and record myself explaining my idea to them. And it was because when I write things on paper, it often is jargony, or it flows in my head, but it doesn't flow to the reader. So what I found is that if I just talk to them about my ideas, it was in a narrative style that had logical flow, because it has to have logical flow in conversation, or else it's a bad conversation. So by doing that, you're helping to ensure that the ideas are in the right order and that it makes sense to someone who doesn't study what you study. That's a great place to start. The second point would be, if you put your stuff on paper and gave it to each other, you're each probably not going to be specialist on what the other's doing. So if Alex if Alex, who specializes in media and information, provides insights to Madeline stuff on welfare, and Madeline stuff on, with their eye on welfare, takes a look at the information, both of you would be able to initially say, look, this doesn't belong, or this doesn't make sense, or I don't see why this is important. So you are your own best resources. I'm not advocating responsibility to look at your proposals, but I'm saying before you send it to us, send it to each other. Or grab some pizza and sit down and talk through your ideas and see what makes sense both conversationally and then to the ear of someone who doesn't do what you do.
No, that's fantastic advice. The more people you can talk to about it, the better, but there is something special about sharing the experience with others who are also struggling with and know the parameters of what you're trying to do, but are not in your own area. So yeah, you don't feel like you can't talk to each other about these things. Take advantage of it. And if it's helpful, I mean, I'm happy to try and create time and space for that, but I also know y'all have complicated schedules that it's probably easier for you to work out, the three of you, than to get me involved. But I am toying with the idea, so let me know if it would be helpful of having like a couple of days with an hour or two held where any of you can stop by all together or individually to just ask questions or sort of touch base on things in early January as well. So trying to give you options for that.
And even though I only exist in the cyber world, we could always have an event like Shark Tank style where you show up and pitch your idea and I could say, well, here's what I like and don't like. That's definitely doable.
Love Shark Tank policy proposal day. Let's do it. Awesome. All right, well, I'm mindful of time because I know we are still, I mean, Alex, you're kind of done, but Madeline, you still got things to do. And Dr. Wilson, I know you have things to do. So just really appreciate you all taking the time. I will share this recording. So in case you missed anything or want to go back and visit it. And also since Reese wasn't here, that way she can see what was happening. But this is such helpful information. I really appreciate it, Dr. Wilson, and hope that it has given you guys some things to think about. And also just thank you both for all the work that you've already put into this, because I know it's a long slog and there's a lot of other stuff going on, but we are excited for you and proud of you and look forward to reaching the end of this in another month and a half.
Very proud.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen and Dr. Wilson. Jen, would you be able to share the recording from like the Truman workshop? That was the one from last week, I think it was. You had sent us an email about.
Yes. You know what?
Okay.
You actually can find it because you should have access to the online application, right? You have the truman.gov invite. If you go in there, it should be a link in resources for you. If you can't, but I'll also try and pull it out and send it to you as well. But yeah,
Okay, perfect.
that was good
Thank you.
because Tara, I mean, she did a whole presentation from Truman, you know, what they're looking for and all the various things, and then answered a lot of questions because there were about 100+ students on that call. So it was really interesting to see the questions that students ask. And you guys, yeah, like I forget the things that you don't know because I've been doing this for so long. So it's good to have that. So I will definitely share that as well. Thanks for the reminder.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else would be helpful? Oh, all right. Well, happy finals. Good end of semester to everyone.
Bye, Madeline. Bye, Alex. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.